Right, this is the first lesson in Unit 2 of Weimar and Nazi Germany, which is Paper 3. Now, this is the lesson, this unit is based on the early years of the Nazi Party, and we're looking at the development of the Nazi Party in the years 1919 to 1929. And this first lesson is looking at the early years of the Nazi Party from 1919 to 1922. So we're going to look at how Hitler got involved. We're also going to look at the early years of Hitler's life and the early years of the Nazi Party itself. And then look at how the Nazi Party was able to become a political party in the years 1919 to 1922. So we'll start off with a little bit of exam practice. So what can you infer about Hitler's early life from source A? Now remember, the inference question is question 1 in paper 3. And an inference is a guess. It's not a regurgitation, so your inference should never just copy out parts of the source. The quote is the second part. So this source, what can you infer about Hitler's life from source A? It says very clearly, my life was a continuous struggle with hunger. I had but one pleasure, my books. At that time I read enormously and thoroughly. In this way I forged in a few years' time the foundation of a knowledge from which I still draw nourishment today. In this period there took shape, without me, a world picture and philosophy, which became the granite foundation of all my acts. In addition to what I then created, I've had to learn little, and I've had to alter nothing. So if I said that one of the inferences was that Hitler was hungry, that is not going to be an inference because it is a description. You could infer that Hitler lived a life of poverty in his early life because of the quote, my life was a continuous struggle with hunger. That's the difference. He's hungry as a description because it's in the source. He lived in a life of poverty is an inference because you are guessing that from what the source says. So just spend 5 minutes for the start of this lesson going through this inference question and just write an answer. You should be able to tell if you've got 4 out of 4 because it's a very easy response to be able to do that with. So how does the Nazi Party grow? There's probably 4 stages as historians see it. So 1919 to 22 was the beginning and development. 1923 where they actually did a failed uprising against the government. The Nazi Party was actually banned and Hitler was put in prison. 1925 to 28 Hitler, who was released from prison after 9 months, reorganised the Nazi Party, but in this period they didn't get many votes and it was known as the lean years. But in 1929 to 1933, the Nazis begin to make huge gains in the elections. They gain huge popularity, and by January 1933, Hitler becomes the Chancellor in Germany, which is one below the President. And we know from our previous lessons on the Constitution that the Chancellor is usually the leader, or is the leader, of the biggest party, the one that gets the most votes. So by 1933, the Nazi Party were the biggest political party in Germany. So Hitler's early life, I'm not going to go through this too much, but when after I've read this information, you need to summarise Hitler's early life in 3 lines, 2 bullet points, 5 keywords, and then 1 word. So Hitler had a very difficult relationship with his family. His father died in 1903, died of a heart attack. He had a very poor relationship with his dad, who beat him, and his dad wanted to force Hitler into a career in politics. But Hitler, in his early life, wanted to be an artist. Hitler was incredibly close to his mother, and after she died in 1907 of breast cancer, people commented on how severe Hitler's grief was. A lot of people believed that this was the start of a downward spiral for Hitler, because he then went to go ahead, move forward, tried to get into art school, and it became a really difficult time overall. So in 1907, Hitler was rejected by the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. He spent 5 years following that living on the street, spending his inheritance money and selling handmade postcards. This is where Hitler began to blame Jews for his downtrodden life. So a lot of historians have this understanding that the anti-Semitic beliefs that Hitler had might have been from his difficult early life. Hitler then went to Munich in 1913 and volunteered to join the German army. Now, because he wasn't a German citizen, he had to get special permission for this, which he did. And he joined the 16th Bavarian Reserve Infantry, and he fought in key battles such as the Battle of the Somme. He reached the rank of Lance Corporal, the Gefreut. This wasn't due to Hitler's skills. This was mainly down to the fact that Hitler survived so many different battles and attacks. At the end of the war in 1918, Hitler was in hospital as he was temporarily blinded by a mustard gas attack. And this is where Hitler found out about the defeat in the First World War. And he was angered. The fact that Germany had surrendered. And he blamed the politicians for stabbing Germans in the back. And then Hitler was later asked in 1919 to actually go and spy on right-wing parties. He was actually asked by the army. And he attended the meeting of the DAP, the German Workers' Party, in 1920. And this led to Hitler actually joining the party as he agreed with their ideas. The DAP, the German Workers' Party, would later come to be known as the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party. So, based on Hitler's early life, summarise it in 3 lines, 2 bullet points, 5 key words and 1 word, and then we'll start moving on and looking at a little bit more detail about how the German Workers' Party began. Now, to understand how to set up a political party in this context, there's 5 key things we're going to look at. So firstly, get your ideas in place. Win people over. Organise yourself. Have a good, clear leadership structure. And scare people who don't like you. We're going to look at 5 ways that the Nazis developed, and we're going to take that further to move on in future lessons for when we look at the reorganisation. So firstly, get your ideas in place. So Hitler began to take control of policies of the DAP. When the DAP first started in 1919, it was a very small party that only had about 20 members and didn't have enough money to buy groceries. So they needed to develop their membership numbers to bring more money in. And if they bring more money in, then they can spread their ideas further. Now, when Hitler took control of the policies, this was a party of protest, and this party didn't like the Weimar politicians who got rid of the Kaiser and accepted the Treaty of Versailles. They also didn't like democracy, which they thought was weak. And this party also openly opposed the Jews, who they thought was undermining the German economy. Now, by January 1920, Hitler became the head of party propaganda. And in February 1920, Hitler and Drexler was the man who originally thought of the Nazi Party, or the DAP, wrote the party's 25-point programme. Every party has a manifesto of ideas, and this was the DAP's manifesto. Now, later on, the German Workers' Party became the National Socialist German Workers' Party, but their first set of ideas, the 25-point programme, had both nationalist ideas, which were right-wing, and socialist ideas, which are left-wing. Now, you need to go through the extracts from the 25-point programme and decide if they are nationalist or socialist. Now, the key thing about having ideas of both, right-wing and left-wing, is that it appeals to more people. There were other parties in Germany, or in Europe as well, that appealed to workers more, and this was the Communist Party, especially because Russia had just gone through a communist revolution. So this party needed to appeal to as many people as possible to get more membership, and more membership brings more money, and more money brings more propaganda. So these are some of the extracts from the 25-point programme. So you've got: we demand the union of all Germans in a greater Germany. We demand equality of rights for the German people in its dealings with other nations. We demand land and colonies to feed our people and settle our surplus population. Only those of German blood are members of the nation. No Jew may be a member of the nation. We demand that a state's primary duty must be to promote work and the livelihoods of its citizens. All citizens should have equal rights and equal duties. We demand a law to take from the owners any land needed for the common good of the people. We demand the creation of a people's army. And we demand the creation of a strong central state power for the Reich. That last one basically means a dictatorship. Strong central state means that the democracy doesn't really exist. Okay? So, go back through those and decide if they are nationalist or socialist. Key thing you understand here is they were a party that were opposed to many things. They were an extreme party, and they were a party which shared ideas to try and get more members to support their party. Now, the next step of getting a political party is winning people over. Now, if you look at these two sources, what inferences can you make about the reasons for the Nazis' growth in membership? So that first source is a picture of Hitler delivering a speech. Now, in the DAP meetings, Hitler was actually the star speaker. In around 15 of their meetings, he was the head person who was delivering the main bulk of the meeting. And if you have a look at that first picture, you can see how Hitler dominates a room. You can see how Hitler gains people's attention with his speaking skills, his oracy skills. You can see how the Nazi membership there is starting to grow because it's based around one leader. You can also see in the background as well a member of the SA, which could suggest that the Nazi growth in membership is down to fear. But if you look at the next source, this is from a supporter of a meeting in 1926, and they said that a wave of jubilation rising from afar, moving into the lobby, announced the arrival of the Führer, and then the auditorium went wild. When the speech came to an end, there were tears in my eyes. Other men, women and youngsters were as deeply affected as I. Now this suggests that Hitler had skills which were able to play on people's emotions, which were able to get people basically on their side. Hitler, being the leader, showed that this could really work. Okay? That's the key thing with this, is by winning people over through strong oracy skills, through strong leadership skills. Now step 3 is a bit more difficult because this is a long-term thing, getting organised. So by 1920, Hitler was Drexler's right-hand man in the DAP, and he introduced a number of changes. These changes were to make the Nazi Party, or the DAP, look more organised in the long run. If they look more organised, then effectively they might gain more votes, more members, more money. So the first thing they did was build or have new offices. In January 1920, they set up a permanent office in Munich. This makes the party look professional. This makes the party look like the real deal. Hitler appointed an old army friend, Rudolf Schussler, as a full-time administrator, which shows that the party is serious about their organisation, the running of the party. And by having someone full-time, it shows that they take it seriously. Hitler also said that the party should change its name from the DAP to the NSDAP. By calling themselves the German Workers' Party, it limited the support they got. By calling them the National Socialist German Workers' Party, they have elements of national, which is everyone, right wing, socialist, which is the left wing, German, which is national, okay, gets that patriotic pride, and then workers links back to the extreme left wing, which could try and gain some support. They also developed a logo, the swastika, and the straight-armed party salute, which made them recognisable, which made people realise that they were the Nazi party. And they also had a new newspaper. Bigger membership brought in enough funds for the NSDAP to buy the People's Observer, the Volkscher Beobachter. This was really important as it could get the Nazis' ideas across. It could then start developing that propaganda, which means they could start getting their 25-point programme out into the public domain. You then have a clear leadership structure. Now by July 1921, Hitler forced a leadership contest. Hitler basically in July 1921 became the overall leader of the NSDAP. He forced Drexler out, and he then surrounded himself with people to help him lead the party. And they were carefully selected for their skills and their image. So I'm just going to go through each one. And This would explain, or these are the people that Hitler keeps around him, and you could just have a think about what they would bring. So you had Rudolf Hess, who was Hitler's deputy, who was a wealthy academic. He was very similar to Hitler. He had the same ideas. He was very academic, so he was very book smart in that respect. He was wealthy, so he could bring money to help develop the propaganda. Hermann Goering was a young, dashing, wealthy World War I fighter pilot. The fact he fought in World War I would play on the emotions of the veterans. The fact he was young and dashing might appeal to women. And the fact he was wealthy might also appeal to the middle and upper class. Julius Streicher, a viciously racist publisher who founded another Nazi paper, Der Stürmer. Julius Streicher, the fact he was a racist means that he sort of follows the Nazis' ideology, their ideas. And he also brought with them another newspaper. The more the Nazis could spread their ideas, the better for their overall popularity. Ernst Röhm, a scar-faced, bull-necked ex-army soldier who was popular among ex-soldiers. If you're the Nazi Party, you want to get people on your side, especially ex-soldiers. This man did that. Ernst Röhm was able to build up the SA, which we'll talk about shortly. Being an army officer means he would have respect, and just that overall sort of aura of fear is what Ernst Röhm brought to the Nazi Party. And then you had General Ludendorff, who wasn't a member of the Nazi Party, but he was the leader of the German army during World War I, and he became a friend of the party. Now, by having someone so respectable, the leader of the German army during World War I, shows that the Nazi Party were gaining credibility. The last step for 1919 to 22 is to scare people who don't like you. Now, this is where the SA were created. The SA, the Sturmarbeitung, or the Stormtroopers, were made in August 1921, a month after Hitler took over. And they were a paramilitary force, which were a private group. And these people were made up of the unemployed, ex-soldiers, who had lost their job in the army due to the Treaty of Versailles. They were in brown uniforms. They were known as the brown shirts. They paraded the streets. They made the Nazis look strong. And by 1922 they had about 800. And they impressed people with their power and organisation. These individuals, the SA, were used to disrupt opposition meetings, which would make the Nazis stronger. The SA did strengthen Hitler's power as the leader of the NSDAP, but they were from a difficult background, so they could have been very hard to control. Now, Hitler couldn't control it all, so he put Ernst Röhm in charge of them, but he expected the SA to be 100% loyal to him. This could become a problem later on if the SA start to look up to Röhm more than Hitler. So, just to finish the lesson, to create the Nazi Party, what do you think was the most important reason and why? Was it get your ideas in place, win people over, get organised, having a clear leadership structure, or scare people who don't like you? If you write yourself a Peel paragraph choosing which one of these 5 factors helps the Nazi Party create and develop in the first initial years, then that's your first lesson on the Nazi Party 1919 to 1922.